Welcome to the Cinematologist podcast. I'm Neil Fox, and joining me as ever is Dario Linares. Hello, Dario.
Hey, Neil. How's it going? Are you well?
I am really well, yes. I've just come in from 2 hours of blowing bubbles in the garden and watching a 3-year-old chase the bubbles to pop them.
Nice.
And performing an impromptu gig for an unimpressed dog where I was on maracas and Tessa was on harmonica. So
Wow.
yeah.
So a new concept band is born.
It is, yeah. And it was a very similar response to when I was actually in a band in my teens. A lone dog wandering off thinking, what is this nonsense?
Well, we are nothing but for the wide audience.
Exactly.
On this podcast.
Exactly. If you want niche, experimental, multi-generational racket, then I've got you covered. What about you?
Awesome. I'm okay. I'm just enjoying my afternoon gin and tonic. A bit of sound effects there for you.
Very nice.
And yeah, it's really warm here, so I've been out in the garden. I've been doing a lot of writing today, and then just sort of had a couple of work emails, and then had a little bit of a half an hour outside. And then I've just been listening to you as well in your interview with Jerry Padfield on our other podcast, New Oral Cultures. And I have to say, it's kind of listening to it really kicked me up the arse in terms of our podcast funding bid. I'm committing it now to sort of
to tape,
to tape, digital tape, whatever you want to call it. That once I get these two pieces in, which is going to be at the end of the month, then next month we're going to get that finished and get that off. Because I think the way that you talked about it there, actually, in a different world where we weren't always reliant on the text to define everything, then I would just send them that podcast and say, this is what we want to do, because I think it was a really good exploration. I think actually we should link to it when we send off the bid and say, look, if you've got time, you don't just want to read all this, just listen to that, because it was really, really good and sort of, again, got my juices flowing in terms of what we could do in terms of sort of this, podcast studies research, because it's definitely there. And, as ever, time and circumstances get in the way of these things. But yeah, it was a really great listen. I thought the conversation between you and Jerry. We'll link to that on the show notes.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, it's weird. It's one of those things that, it kind of drifts in and out because, like you say, it's so busy. But just sitting down and talking with him kind of did remind me as well of like, actually, this is something I really want to kind of get involved with, and our work together has kind of led us here. So yeah, hopefully we can continue that work. And nice job.
When did you take that? How long ago was that?
That was, I think it was this year.
It's all
which feels
time
like
is relative, of course.
It is, but yeah, I think it was at the beginning of this year at the uni, and so kind of pre all of this, but certainly recently in terms of our thinking, and probably maybe just after Mexa, where we kind of had that great event with you, me, and Martin, kind of doing that panel on podcasting, which was another one of those kind of galvanizing experiences in terms of podcast studies. So I think it was around then. I was definitely on a high of thinking, this is really exciting.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, it's interesting stuff moving forward for us, but we've got a very exciting podcast coming up for you. Again, one that you've put a lot of work into in terms of collecting a range of interviews and focusing on this particular short film project that's come up.
Yeah, so this is our Uncertain Kingdom episode, and the Uncertain Kingdom is a short film project which has been going, I guess, a year, 18 months, maybe just over a year, and was set up by a group of producers to try and capture in short film form some of the tenor of the country at the moment, and just kind of take the temperature of Britain in a really strange time, even strange pre kind of COVID, but kind of post.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to stress that these aren't COVID films, but it's interesting how many of them sort of almost retrospectively allude to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think we'll definitely talk about that at the end, and that was something that, although we never really talked about it in the interviews, it was definitely in the air. And I think that the situation that's kind of exacerbated by COVID has been, in the air in this country for a while. And I think that what was interesting about this project was that it was a group, sort of group of producers asking for a range of responses that kind of examined that in a variety of different ways. So it's a collection of short narrative, documentary and experimental work from all different corners of the kind of the filmmaking spectrum. And the films were due for release in April, but obviously that got put back, and now they're going to be online from the 1st of June, which is really exciting. And yeah, sort of just literally as the lockdown started and things were kind of changing, I spoke to several filmmakers behind the project and one of the producers, John Jencks, about it all. And yeah, I watch a lot of short films anyway, and was really excited to do an episode like this, because we haven't really covered it in terms of short film form. We've talked about short films in a variety of different ways, and even recently with sort of Mark Cousins and Girish Shambhu and So Maya kind of brought up this kind of placement of the short form in kind of context of film careers as something which should be valued more highly, because of often it's the only form that people get to make in. And and again, interesting thing about this project is that it's a rare example of, a kind of really kind of vibrant and diverse funding stream coming along line for short film. And a lot of the filmmakers are in similar sort of stages of their career who've kind of taken to making them. And should be mentioned as well, it's a mix of commissions by the producers, and then it was an open call where some of the filmmakers were asked to submit ideas that were then developed and produced.
Yeah, and a really interesting range of work, I think, is there. And in the conversations that you have, one of the things that struck me was this sort of sense of what the short film is, and how one of the problems, it represents some of the problems fundamentally with the film industry in the UK, i.e. things like the idea of what does a British film culture look like, and how does it get supported. But then also, related to that is where, what is a distribution platform for short films? And basically there isn't one. It's kind of, you've got to be into short films or in the club or understanding who to follow on Vimeo or there's a kind of a set of parameters around engaging with short films that is quite exclusory, I think. And again, one of the problems with the way that British film structure is set up, and probably even, I can't speak for other countries, but the hierarchy between the feature and the short is just so immensely lopsided. It's very difficult for short films to be seen other than kind of a promo for a filmmaker who wants to get into features, which is a little bit sad. And one of the things that I talk to the students about a lot, especially early on, is that you've got $250 million blockbusters here, and then you've got zero budget shorts here, and you shouldn't really be taking your cues from this thing that is so far away. I mean, not saying don't be inspired by it, but do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not what you're going to be making. So trying to get students to watch short films is always a kind of battle a little bit,
Yeah, absolutely. And try, like you say, trying to get them to kind of conceptualize what they're doing in relation to the short film, rather than even a feature film. I think I when I'm teaching screenwriting for shorts, I'm trying to show a lot of short films, because I think so often one of the problems is that the teaching of short film, or the short film screenwriting, is based around 3-act structure for features, which just doesn't work. For me, a short film is its own thing that kind of has some of the codes and conventions sometimes of features in terms of structure, but it's kind of doing its own thing, and there are different expectations, and it's exciting to teach that and see students kind of get on board with that way of doing things, rather than trying to always cram this kind of overarching big journey narrative into 10 minutes, which always kind of does it a disservice. And I've always enjoyed making shorts, and hope to still do. And one of our friends, Mark Jenkins, still makes shorts and makes great short films. And for me, there's always been an attraction in kind of working in that mode that was separate from features, rather than just let's make a few shorts that show that we can make a feature, which is a part of it, but shouldn't be the only thing. And it was exciting that this project came along and was specifically for shorts, because when collected, there's a really interesting body of work, which is greater, I think, than the sum of the individual shorts on their own. It's how they kind of speak to each other and how they kind of represent as a kind of tapestry of work, what the project is trying to do.
And I think one of the really positive things about the Uncertain Kingdom project is, I think, that distribution was in mind. So there's places on Channel 4 and on Sky and on other areas where, the thinking behind the project is we're not just going to make them. There's going to be a place for them to go, which is something I think obviously the project producer sort of talks about in the first interview.
Yeah, and that's really, really important because, like you're saying, is like the distribution is such a key aspect in terms of the shorts being taken seriously and the filmmakers getting exposure, both as filmmakers of a variety of different content, but also eventually kind of feature film filmmakers, if that's what they want to do, or if it's TV or whatever. What's interesting in terms of the short film sites that are out there is that a lot of them have kind of long been championing these kinds of films, you know. And I did want to, it sort of comes out in the interviews, I did want to ask the filmmakers if they, you know, what they thought of a project like this, and hopefully it means there'll be more kind of projects like this moving forward, where, you know, people are making short narrative or short documentary, short experimental films like this that are then part of the viewing landscape. You know, Mubi shows a lot of shorts, and increasingly, obviously, with the situation we're in now, a lot of different platforms are looking for different types of content. So hopefully it's a further kind of boost to the distribution of this kind of shorts. But I did want to sort of mention, the reason I sort of mentioned that is because obviously we know people who run great short sites like Marbell, who runs Director's Notes, friend of ours, also works at Director's Notes, Rob Monday, who's involved with Short of the Week, and James Matry, who runs 12 Cabins, which is a kind of short film horror site. And there are many, many more, but those are obviously the ones that we know. And I think it's exciting that short film still kind of is a place where innovative, inventive things can happen rather than just a calling card for features. And a lot of this stuff is kind of emblematic of that, as well as obviously containing ideas that you could see being explored at kind of greater length in different ways.
So Neil, also you put down on our running order the fact that you actually applied to this. So do you want to say something about that? I mean, it must have been, obviously, you know, you're taking it magnanimously. Whenever you apply for something, you apply not with the expectation it's gonna happen. But did that give you a certain sort of context for coming into the interviews and watching the films?
Yeah, I wanted to see if they were all terrible and feel really, you know, put out.
Schadenfreude is so sweet.
Yeah. And then was really annoyed when they were good. But no, in all seriousness. I was interested in seeing the films, and the fact that, you know, I got to see the films even before the filmmakers, and that was interesting kind of when I spoke to the filmmakers and said I'd seen all of them. You know, none of them had, they'd only seen theirs. So I sort of saw it before everyone else, and just kind of seeing the project, and I'd followed it since it was launched and had kind of applied, and was just curious to see what they'd made, you know. And yeah, you're right, there was no kind of bitterness in terms of, oh, why didn't they accept mine, you know, maybe it wasn't very good, but I was hopefully erring on the side that they had a vision for the project, and, you know, how everything fits together, like any kind of edited collection really, does it fit together as a kind of whole piece, was what I was interested in. And I didn't bring it up in the interviews because I thought, you know, it wasn't about me in that sense, but I thought, you know, now revealing, if they're listening, that I did apply, and it was a nice process. You know, I think it was an open kind of, it was a good brief, and it was, you know, I had a kind of project that I'd been working on and just sort of thinking about, and it was one of those great opportunities which a lot of the filmmakers talked about, was a chance to hone an idea into a pitch and into a package, you know. So even if it didn't get made this time, it's now something that it wasn't before, and that's always, I think, a really valuable part of any submission process, which is, you know, working towards making something better or making something more tangible and kind of concrete. So it was really valuable in that sense. And yeah, it's you know, I'd like to think that I'm not the sort of person who wouldn't support something just because I didn't get the chance to do it. It was really good to talk to the filmmakers who did get selected, and sort of hear their rationale and realise that the spirit seemed to be the same across the board, you know, a kind of willingness to engage with the brief, which was, how are we feeling right now about what's going on in Britain, and how can we kind of turn that into interesting short film work.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely happens through the list of films, particularly I watched all of the ones that you had the interview for, but there's more than that, so I'm gonna have a look through all of them. But yeah, it's an interesting one because, you know, understanding or it's an interesting one because the reaction to the brief of what is kind of Britishness and it's always it seems obviously in the last however many years the notion of diversity is ingrained into that idea of Britishness from kind of projects that are looking to, ask that question in these particular kinds of ways. And you might sort of, I know that there would be a critique of, why is it always diversity, But I think that there's still so much work to do in that area. Do you know what I mean? And not, not just in the sort of narrow sense of that, but that idea of inclusiveness, even, you know what I mean, that mixes up with diversity, I think is really important. And I think that there are films here that are sort of overtly critical, but also kind of quite, in a good way, really sort of abstract about what the idea of Britishness is. Because I think if there's anything that the last 3 years particularly has taught us, and has been amplified over the last sort of 6 months, is that we're a country, I think, that's struggling with the idea of what Britishness is. And it seems to me that, again, as a sort of liberal lefty, I might say this, that we seem to be spending an awful lot of time looking back instead of looking forward. And that's one of the problems of what's going on right now a lot of the time. A great set of films and a great set of interviews. So who did you speak to?
So I spoke to, first off, a couple of apologies to Iggy, who directed Sucker Punch, and Sophie King, who directed Swan, two of the films in the collection. And I did speak to both of them, but coming to edit, and there's corruption on the tapes, on the recording, sorry, not the tapes, obsessed with tapes, but on the recording. So they're not included in this bunch because despite trying to work around, couldn't salvage the recording. So apologies to them, but we will talk a little bit about their films at the end. So in this section, there are interviews with John Jencks, one of the producers of the Uncertain Kingdom project. Then conversations with Stroma Cairns, who is a documentary filmmaker who made the film Sauna and is a graduate of Falmouth University, and we both taught her. Jason Wingard, a narrative director of the film Pavement. Alison Hargreaves, who directed the documentary Camelot. And Antonia Campbell-Hughes, who directed the... it was classed in the experimental, but it definitely feels like an experimental narrative sci-fi film, Acre Fall Between. So this is my conversation with them, and thanks to all of them for giving up their time to talk about this project.
I just want to feel like everybody else.
I cannot remember a time in my life where beauty was not some central metric of how I define my self-worth.
I may not look like the English, but I'm certainly English and British.
The biggest hurdle as a teenager, and then as a grown-up, is deciding that I'm the protagonist of my own story.
Hey, wake up!
Destiny means your future and how you want to live.
It's time to take control. The future's yours if you want it.
John Jencks, one of the producers of The Uncertain Kingdom. Thanks for chatting to me today.
No worries.
I watched all the films.
Goodness. Well done.
Yeah, pre self-isolation as well, so I don't know what I'm going to do now. Would have been handy, I think. But no, really enjoyed it. I think it's a really impressive slate of films, particularly considering, when projects like this come together, or even festivals, there's usually a really variable kind of range of quality, but I think that the hit rate is really impressive, and I think that the diversity aim of the project seems to have been hit as well as you can. I think given the who can make films and who's telling what type of stories at any given time.
I mean, I think one way we managed to do that is that we deliberately went out and invited 5 invited 10 filmmakers and then did an open call for 10. And even with those 10 that we invited, there were people that had to drop out or were very honest about whether they could fully commit to it. So some of them sort of dropped out because they were like, we really love this project, but I don't think I've got enough time to really do something that's really good.
Yeah.
So there was a certain amount of sort of self-deselection, and that meant that we could keep the quality really high. And then with the invited filmmakers, they were all really interested in working very closely with us, and we really helped develop their projects, and then sort of let them get on with it, which was really nice. But yeah, I thought I'm really surprised we had such a high hit rate as well. I thought there would be sort of maybe 2 or 3 that were good, and I think we've got 15 that are good and probably another 5 that are really world class.
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good estimation. Your as kind of executive producers, your background is in kind of production and development. And what was really interesting to hear from the people I've spoken to was how they felt really well supported in terms of the projects, but not interfered with, which I think is you don't hear that very often. So
you hear the opposite quite often. I mean, how many stories are there of filmmakers feeling quite bereft of support and also hands off?
Yeah.
No, the film industry is full of stories of overly involved execs. But we always knew that there were only 3 of us working on this project, and we always knew that 20 projects was too many.
Yeah.
For us all to really get involved in. So it was slightly by design that we could. I made sure we had so many so that we could be really involved, but not too involved, because otherwise you would mess it up.
Yeah. Do you think does it help when they're kind of short films as well? Because there's almost an inbuilt freedom to short films to kind of be more experimental or more, kind of loose in terms of the traditional structures that are associated with sort of feature-length stuff.
I think you have to be very selecting in, even more than full-length features. Short films have to some degree, be concept-driven, and will live and die by their concept. So once you've got someone who's really, and I think most of our work was concerning actually getting people to focus down their vision and statement of what the film was. So if you, because a woolly short film, just it's so focused on theme that really focus people's ideas and energy, and I think that's always very helpful. In terms of the experimental nature of the films, to me, the films were so strongly of the individual filmmakers and the style of films that they make that they probably weren't much of even if they feel experimental in the results and in the watching of them, they weren't hugely offbeat and experimental for the individual filmmakers. These are all people who make these kind of films very passionately and very strongly. I'm not sure how much on an individual basis there was that sort of, I'm going to do something a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Even if it does feel like that as a member of the audience.
Yeah. You sort of mentioned there about kind of conversations about what the film is about, theme, or the kind of the thesis of them. But what's interesting about the work is that a lot of that stuff is not explicit in a lot of the films. They're not didactic, they're not preachy. So is that a kind of conversation that you're having with the filmmakers so that it doesn't have to necessarily be as pronounced in the work?
I think you can be strongly and richly thematic without being didactic. And, you know, I think you can offer up a dramatic conflict and a difficulty without turning into someone who necessarily says that there are these two opposing things, and option A is definitely the right one and option B is definitely the wrong one. I think our filmmakers, you know, there was a lot of being like, we've got option A and B that are fighting each other, and this is a bit of a mess, and we don't know what to, you know.
Yeah.
So I think, and I think maybe because of the choice of the title being The Uncertain Kingdom, people weren't going into this thinking, oh, I've got to come up with a way of making things certain, or, you know, pushing this agenda very strongly.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a deliberate push for what you're suggesting. I think it that occurred through a process of just the process of making them. I mean, we did in choosing the films, which was fun sort of process of that. But we did at one stage, you know, we had sort of a short list of 40, and we kept sticking them up on the wall, Georgia, Izzy, and I, and doing these sort of mind maps of how they all sat with each other. And there was definitely an idea of, you know, how do these ones, the films individually, speak to each other, so that the whole selection maybe made a statement rather than picking individual films that didactically made a statement.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely comes through. Yeah, I think that there's a real benefit to the project from having that sense that these films are complicated films about a complicated time. You know, I think that's and I think it's really striking as a body of work how similar they all are in terms of how they're addressing just the day-to-day existence of kind of Britain and Britishness. I think it's a real achievement of production as much as anything else. And you sort of alluded to there to having a lot of entries. You know, I remember sort of following the project online, and it did seem like you were kind of overwhelmed, almost not expecting there to be as many filmmakers who wanted to engage with this idea that you'd set out.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was, and I, you know, the idea, I had the idea for the project sitting in the bath in November. Spoke to a couple of friends about it. They said, "Oh, yeah, all right, I think of doing one of those." Spoke to Georgia and Izzy, who came on board as my co-execs, and then, you know, and we picked our 10 filmmakers, and we just thought, okay, we're going to announce on Twitter that it's going to come out, and we said we were going to be open for 2 weeks to accept applications. I think on the Friday of the end of the 2 weeks, we had 600 applications, and by the midnight on the Sunday, we had 1,147. So at that point, we thought, "Oh goodness, what have we done?" Or we've done the right thing as well, you know.
Yeah,
it was much more successful than we thought.
And it's interesting because I think that there's always the commentary that, you know, where's the next Ken Loach? Where's the next person who's going to be kind of making films about kind of the contemporary society? But it seems like this project shows there's a real hunger to do that, and maybe that you know there is a greater desire to tell work that is kind of socially resonant than we might be led to believe. I think that's really exciting.
I think it is. I mean, my concern is always, you know, I've, you know, grown up in my filmmaking career through the process of making short films and going to short film festivals and all that kind of thing. And there always has been a lot of social commentary within the short film world, but it doesn't seem to break out. And I wonder if that is because, partially because we have so much sort of social commentary in the TV world, in British culture, and also partially because there isn't, while we have all the tax credits and everything in terms of production, there isn't good support of helping release British films into cinemas, and therefore it doesn't, there isn't a reflective British cinema culture quite as much. Yeah. I don't know. I think there's a distribution issue there as well as let's held people back.
Yeah, and I think which is again kind of exciting that a project like yours kind of attracts the attention of cinemas and kind of creates this package that cinemas are interested in putting on, as well as there being obviously an online component, which is the natural home for short films nowadays.
I think so. It was, I said to cinemas, look, you can, just schedule, you only have to take one Uncertain Kingdom, but there are 2 programs, so you can show them alternating nights, and therefore, people might come 2 nights in a row to come and see the other program.
Yeah.
I tried to make quite a strong business case for it. But yeah, and I think, having that mix of filmmakers also helped cinemas get excited. And, they're always looking to do things that are maybe a little bit different, that seem to have captured the imagination. So yeah.
I think as well, one of the things that I really loved about it was just how you really kind of honoured a range of voices as per the brief in terms of gender representation and from different parts of the United Kingdom and different kind of ethnic backgrounds and things like that. So I think it shows that there is scope in models like this to really kind of address some of the things that people talk about addressing a lot of the time.
I mean, it's difficult that, we do have a good variety of representation of people. But then I always feel the ones we missed. Yeah. I feel very sad that we don't have a sort of Indian filmmakers, British Indian. We've got one British from a British Muslim heritage, but I can still see loads of voices that are missing.
Yeah.
And I think that's sad, and also we worked very hard. Our real focus in getting this diversity of people was actually having a diversity of stories, and that was our focus. I think the project would have been less successful had we pushed for diversity of identities, but allowed, we and had lots of films that were more similar.
Yeah.
The focus was on making different kinds of films. It's odd. We had a look at some of the data in the submissions, and we discovered that there were a huge number of films that where the main protagonist was an immigrant with supernatural powers.
Interesting.
I mean, literally hundreds of them. And we spent a lot of time working out what that, why are we getting all of these? And, they were positive. They weren't, anyway, it was sort of these othered immigrants who were then further othered by being sort of supernatural in some way.
Just to wrap up, obviously I can't imagine the scale of the work involved in kind of pulling something like this together. But also, do you think that it's the kind of approach that you might return to in the future? Because it feels like such a good, not just a good thing in terms of the types of films, but just in terms of a model of bringing so many different voices together and getting that collective voice out into the world.
I mean, we've, as a not-for-profit enterprise, and it's required a lot of money to do it.
Yeah.
So that would be the challenge, to do this again immediately. Saying that, we're actually, Georgia, Izzy and I are at this very moment trying to put something together for people to be able to do the sort of short programming while everyone's on self-isolation, but we haven't quite worked out how to do it yet. But we've you're the first person to hear about it.
Exciting.
But yeah, we should be announcing something hopefully at the beginning of next week that is writers in self-isolation writing projects that can be shot in self-isolation.
Wow.
That we can do things with.
Well, I think that's another testament to you guys kind of being in tune with what's going on in the country and kind of finding creative responses to it. So look forward to hearing more about that. But for now, thank you for your time and thank you so much for this project. It's been a real pleasure to spend time watching the films and following it all unfold.
Really enjoyed speaking to you.
The inspiration for Sauna came from me just going to this gym in Lewisham and meeting all of these people. It really inspired me that they all were so open with each other, even though they might have just met. And I think this film is really relevant for the UK now, because I think it's so important that we have community and that we have spaces where we can talk and listen, no matter what faith you are or what your political views are.
Stroh McCairns, director of the documentary Sauna.
It's so brilliant, and I was so surprised to get on it, to be honest, because it was one of those things where a lot of people would email it round, when there's particular funding going around, like, are you applying to this? You should apply to this. And I just thought so many people were probably applying that it was, such a nice surprise to get it.
What made you want to apply?
So, I mean, in the first place, it was just, I'm always looking for funding to make another short, because there isn't that much of it around. So seeing that was come up was sort of the first thing. But then realising that, John Jencks and these great producers are a part of it. And I guess, it's an opportunity for your name to sort of be part of a collective and be part of something which isn't always about new up-and-coming directors. It's also got a real mix of sort of levels of directors in their craft. So it was just exciting to be in a mix of that.
Yeah,
I think that was the main thing.
So so there's other reasons other than just the film itself to be involved.
Yeah, definitely. It was just being part of a collective and knowing that it would be distributed in a way that maybe you wouldn't be able to do with your own film, to get it out there and get it known about. When it was in Screen Daily, they did a whole piece on it, and it's just been talked about quite a lot. So it's just been a really amazing thing for a new filmmaker doing shorts to be a part of.
Was the project that you made something that you had in mind already? Like you sort of said there, kind of always looking for different streams. Was it a project that you were looking for a fund for, or was it something that came out of this call in itself?
No, so I wasn't planning to make this already. I saw the brief and actually initially panicked a bit which can sometimes happen where you're like, oh, I've got to fit this brief. And I started sort of writing something for the brief, you know, some ideas that I've had on the back burner. And then none of it really felt right. And at the same time, I was going to this sauna. I just so happened to be going. I basically would be going after a swim. I just go and sit up there because I preferred to do that because I was lazy. And it was just a really amazing like community that I kind of entered. And then I was kind of thinking, oh, it'd be a great film, but then I think I was sort of too nervous to do it because I thought, oh, it's going to be really difficult to get all of these people to just want to be involved, you know, that's part of documentary. And so I just didn't really want to do it. But then when this came, I just thought, you know what, I've got to do it. And it kind of pushed me to do that idea.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it was like very early stages of the doc, obviously pitching for it. So it was a bit risky, like whether it would actually work.
Yeah.
So I was kind of a bit nervous all through the start because it's like now you've got people backing your doc, it has to be made, which is another thing that I find so great about funding. It's like you have a deadline, you have to get this made. I don't know if it would be different, you know, I'd probably still be making it now if I hadn't been part of a scheme, you know.
Yeah, so almost kind of prompted to have to get it done by the circumstances.
Yeah, totally. It was just like you have to.
Did you feel like, you know, you're sort of saying there about kind of worried about what it's going to be, but do you feel like there's a freedom in shorts that, you know, kind of allows for that kind of finding it as you go? And was that something that was part of the process here?
Yeah, definitely. Like I actually really didn't know what this was. I mean, I knew that it was a good comment on our country today because it was around community, and I really think that is an important thing for us to have, especially now we're realizing that with all corona. But it definitely it kind of went on its whole own journey, and I had no idea. It was really challenging, basically. It's probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done because we had no idea how it was going to end up or what conversations were going to be in it. And so, yeah, I think shorts definitely allow for that. But documentary more so, it's just like you've got a space or an idea, but you don't know, you know, you can't really plan it. You can't write the script. So that was quite stressful. But the producers were really helpful with that because they said, oh, we're interested. Basically, I would go every night and I'd record loads of conversations. And I just had loads of audio and no visuals. And then I had to piece the audio with the visuals separately. So I just kind of made it look like it joined.
Yeah.
But they would say, oh, we're interested in this part and this part. You know, these are the kind of topics that we find more interesting. So that was really helpful. And then it kind of evolved from that, yeah.
Do you think that there's a responsibility on filmmakers to make that kind of work that, you know, kind of comments on society, community, culture, particularly now?
Yeah, I think we can. I think personally, I feel like you shouldn't be like forcing yourself to make something around a particular theme if it's like something that a lot of people are doing, and there is a lot of shit going on in our country, but I think you can't force it. I think you have to make something that actually is really inspiring you and is coming from an authentic place. Otherwise, I think it can kind of be a bad project if you're sort of just trying to make something because it's saying something. I think whenever you're trying to say something, it's just not great. Yeah. So for me, I think that was a bit of a pressure, actually. Like, I don't see myself as a political filmmaker. I make a lot of work stemmed from personal stories or like things that have happened to me or things that are just really close to my heart. And the sauna and this project had to be about something a bit more political, and it was difficult to sort of get used to that. But then I realised it doesn't, like the word political, I think even young people get scared of that. It doesn't mean that you have to know everything. It's just, it is literally commenting on what you're experiencing. And I was experiencing a really special place, and that's all I had to do. I just had to relay how amazing I felt going there, and that in itself, you know, all the other stuff comes naturally. So
well put, yeah. And I think you can trace a lot of those kind of interests in your work back to the work you did at Falmouth and your kind of graduation film, which was very much a, you know, about community and, like you say, and family and kind of identity and things like that. So it's interesting to see. It was interesting to sort of see this film a few years out from having sort of, you know, been around your graduation work as a lecturer and see those themes present and being built on again. It's really interesting to see your voice as a filmmaker, which was strong then, kind of just get stronger and stronger.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I guess it is still about connecting almost. Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it, that you can make so many types of topics of films. And I always got a bit worried about that. Like, you know, I still don't really know what kind of filmmaker I am, but as long as you're just following something that's like really true to you and what you really are inspired by, then it will just fall into place.
Well, yeah, I think you've got good instincts. So and really enjoyed your film, and hope it does what you want it to do. I guess in terms of kind of feeling part of a collective and hopefully leading to more work.
Yeah, no, I hope so as well. It's sad that we can't have them screened, but you know, in a way, I think everyone being online now, you know, maybe it's a good thing. You know, people will really take it in their own time and watch them all. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you, Neil. Speak to you soon, and hope you have a nice time in quarantine.
Cheers, Stroma.
All right, bye.
Jason Wingard, director of the narrative film Pavement. It's a really powerful piece of work, I think. I guess we'll just start with kind of what made you want to contribute to the Uncertain Kingdom project.
Well, I'd seen the brief, and I knew that the idea that we had for it really met the brief really. I mean, I think that you'd have to be I know that they had a lot of homelessness pitches, but I'd had this idea for quite a while, and I knew that it met their brief, and it was something that I wanted to comment on. I've made a range of different things. So kind of I went out to the Calais jungle in 2016, and I made a feature film in the Calais jungle, working with refugees who were kind of playing versions of themselves. And I knew that I wanted to make some more social impact films, you know what I mean? Things that commented on social situations. And this was a film that was, I'd always said that I was not going to bother with short films again, but when the opportunity arose to do this, I thought, oh, this is too good to miss, really. And if I can convince them that we can do it on the small budget, because it was a challenge to do it because of the effects that are required on it.
Yeah.
And it's a weird one, actually, because with the film, I almost feel, I know that I didn't nail the effects, but it almost doesn't matter because it's what the film's saying, which is more potent, you know.
Yeah. I think they work as well as they need to. You know what I mean? In terms of the, which might sound like a criticism, but it's not meant that way.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's kind of like, you know, but that's something that we were aware of. We were aware. We're trying to make what is like a 50 to 100 grand short on a 20 grand. So we knew that it was going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
But we were confident that we could pull it off.
Was it, you sort of mentioned it there, so it was a project that you had in mind, and then sort of when the Uncertain Kingdom came along, you thought this actually works for this brief?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of anyone who lives in an inner city, and actually, even if you don't live in the inner city, you'll have seen the rise in homelessness. It's visible, and you can't really ignore it. And you know that there's social factors that are contributing to that. And so I wanted to do something where you represented that in a visual way. And obviously, cinema works best if you do it visually. So that's what this short was really about. But it was something that, you have certain images in your mind for a long, long time. And so the ending image is something that I had in my mind for a long time. And just to leave that with people. Because, we all go about our daily business, don't we? And we walk past, a crisis. And actually, the way that things are turning out at the moment, I think that kind of like it's perfect time to reflect on all of those things, not just homelessness, but all sorts of social issues. And you hear artists regularly talk about how we're connected and we are together and we need to deal with those kind of things. And I think it's really important. So I think it's obvious what the film is trying to say. I don't think it's going to be lost on anybody. But I like films that we don't. When I did the film in the Calais Jungle, and when I've done this film, I didn't want it to be preachy. You know what I mean? That people can just self-reflect and go, okay, where do I stand on this?
Yeah.
It was quite because the only person who questioned on me was my dad. He went, I wasn't sure how I was meant to feel at the end of your film, which I thought was quite funny.
Yeah.
I told him he was meant to go, okay, yeah, that's one more less homeless person to deal with in his right-wing views.
Yeah.
But, anyway, it's like, this is, we screen it once to an audience, and it's really interesting, isn't it? When you make a film, you pass it over to the audience, and it's how they respond to it. And lots of people responded really well to the film,
Yeah. How important is it, like, when you're kind of going out to make something that doesn't feel preachy, to have an actor like Steve Everts kind of in that role? Because I think that, he brings something to it which is not easily definable as kind of, telling the audience how to feel.
Well, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because, it's tough to tell Steve, when we was first doing it, I was like talking to him and he got it right away. I mean, he got it. I showed him an image that, as like a still. We had an idea of how this was going to look, and we sent him this still image. And he got it right away. He said, yeah, I love this. It's something I really want to be involved in. And ironically, actually, when we were out shooting, one of the security guards was, when they were doing that scene, was trying to move him on. Someone from the university came out, ignored all the film crew and thought this was real and confronted the security guard. And Steve absolutely loved this because people generally don't do anything, do they, when they see kind of social misjustice, some social misjustice. And so, he's a person, he's really grounded. What you see is what you get. He's a working class Mancunian, and he really, really was behind this project. And I think he's perfect for this role because he's totally believable in that role as well. And it's a strange thing because when we were shooting it, we were wondering how much this character needed to say, but the less he said, the more sympathetic he was, I think. And it was important, so you get that middle section where he reveals a little bit more of who he is. And ultimately, he's just, an everyman, isn't he? Anybody can be in this situation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's just finding out at the moment. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned sort of before about, kind of they probably had a lot of films about kind of homelessness, and the film definitely kind of sets it up as if it's the story about homelessness that we might have seen before kind of twisting into something genuinely original and kind of shocking, but in a positive way. Was it important to kind of to make it in that way where you're not the reveal, but the kind of the evolution of the story kind of takes place further in than, almost to suggest to the audience that this is a familiar story?
It wasn't really deliberate. I had a tone in mind, really. There was a film that I saw when I was a kid, actually, or kind of like years ago, called La Cabina, which was about a Spanish film, and it's a short. It's about 30 minutes though, and it's about a guy who gets trapped in a phone booth.
Oh yeah, I thought that's the one you meant. Yeah.
And it was the way that everybody responded to that situation, which I thought was most horrifying. And so that's what we took, really. We thought it wouldn't be interesting to kind of take this and have people gather around him. And this person with no agency at all, and nobody really talks to him. They talk at him and around him. And I think that was the kind of like the tone for the film. That there's one person who sees it, and the rest of the world kind of like is acting like they're sane, and he's the insane person, you know.
Yeah. Do you think we live in times where that there should be more filmmakers making work that kind of reflects these kind of issues?
Well, I saw a tweet actually from Hope Dixon-Leach recently, and she said it feels like, what we've been writing about is no longer relevant. It's all, everything's been shifted. And I think that there will be a response, but I think the kind of like credit to John and the rest of the team who kind of saw that this was an opportunity to make this anthology, and to have artists comment on the social situation that we're facing, the situations that we're facing. So yeah, I think there will be more people commenting on stuff like this. I mean, I'd heard before, where are the next Ken Loach and various other people who are making these kind of films? And I think that it's important, isn't it, that you do have this kind of film being made along with lots of other different kinds of filmmaking, you know.
Yeah.
So for anybody who gives it a platform, I think, hats off to them, really.
Great. Well, yeah, I think it's a really powerful piece of work, and thanks for making it, and thanks for talking to me today.
Yeah, no problem. Cheers, Neil. What you got planned then for? Are you self-isolated as well?
We're not like self-isolating in terms of symptoms. I think we're just kind of social distancing, and now teaching from home. Our daughter's in childminder for the foreseeable, but I imagine middle of next week that might change.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're just kind of prepped to kind of carry on at home, really. So wait and see.
Which other films did you enjoy, by the way?
I'm talking to Sophie. I talked to Sophie about Swan, which was bizarre and great, and then Alison about Camelot, which was this lovely documentary. I'm talking to Hope. I know Hope quite well, so I'm talking to her. I'm talking to Iggy London from Sucker Punch, which is a very interesting film. And then I'm talking to Antonia Campbell-Hughes tomorrow about her experimental sci-fi, to try and get a nice spread of stuff. Then I'm talking to John on Friday about the whole thing. Yeah. So, yeah. But I liked a lot of the work. I was really impressed with the quality.
Really looking forward to seeing some stuff, Yeah. So no doubt, I'm sure at some point we'll get a link to everything ourselves. So.
Indeed, yeah, I'm sure they'll share that out. Yeah. So cool. Well, good luck. Take care.
Cheers, mate.
Really nice to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
See you, man. Bye bye. Alison Hargreaves, director of the documentary Camelot.
Because of the openness of the brief, what they got offered were passion projects. The brief wasn't so specific that people had to mould their ideas to suit it. It was really open. It was just about your particular insight on an element of life in the UK now in any form. So,
yeah, and is that what made you want to contribute to it?
Yeah, well, I think. It felt slightly too good to be true, actually, because normally there are briefs that are more restrictive. And yeah, obviously, I think I was impressed by how open they were being, and how much they were empowering filmmakers to sort of deliver the film that they were desperate to make.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously, I'm interested in the kinds of films that are commenting on society and on our culture and on the things that we share, and maybe are confirming the things we share or giving us a fresh perspective or a new perspective. So it was exactly the sort of thing that I'm drawn to be honest with you.
Great.
And what I'm hoping is that because there is so much variety, that the sort of framework they've created by making an anthology with a sort of under the umbrella of the Uncertain Kingdom anthology, and that there's a guarantee of quality there, and there's some, you know, that actually that sort of framework makes it familiar enough to people that they can sort of explore all of them, you know.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had, because there's so few opportunities for short films to be kind of produced and distributed in this way. It feels like a good model of how you might kind of create similar kind of work moving forward. Is that something that you think is, and hope is, kind of comes out of the project?
I definitely hope that. I think that what I'd like to see more of personally is more variety and a platform for sort of a broader range of perspectives and a broader range of sort of representations and voices. I think that is what's important. And this kind of producing model obviously will, you know, is designed to give us that. And they've obviously made some really conscious choices about the kind of the way the anthology would look as a whole, and who would be represented. And I think that's really, you know, that is the big area which I think would, you know, that sort of direction is probably what I'd like to see the industry take. But as a whole, I think it remains to be seen. I think that it would be interesting to see how it is received, what audiences think. It always feels like you're only halfway through before audiences have seen it. You know, you only know sort of half of what you've got before people start responding. So it'll be really nice to actually have them out in the world and have people watching them and reacting to them. Yeah,
and I think some of them are going to really make people think, you know, which a lot of them do, but you know, but maybe kind of confronting things or seeing things they hadn't necessarily seen that way. I think it's a really interesting slate of films. Was Camelot something that you sort of maybe alluded to it there, that you were working on before? Or was it something that was kind of, you know, that changed when The Uncertain Kingdom sort of came along?
It was something I had in my mind. Yeah, it was something that I was actively developing. And the call out for applications came along just at the time, you know, when I was thinking seriously about that being my next project. So actually it felt like a real sort of magical coincidence that it came along at the right time, to be honest. And that's not always the case, but it was something that I had first thought up a while ago in response to a completely different brief, and then had dropped for a while, but had sort of stayed with me, which had kind of taken me by surprise a little bit, because I thought my interest lay elsewhere, but it sort of was gnawing at me for a while. And I decided that was the next project I wanted to make. And then the call out came along, and it was it sort of put the engine into the idea and gave me a deadline and gave me a structure, and meant that it had to happen, really. Yeah. I had to find all of the resource and the partnerships and get it off the ground.
It captures your kind of interest and kind of expertise in theatre and cinema. Is that something that's common in your work, or is that something that you thought would be a good way of kind of approaching this project in particular?
Yeah, well, the theatre element was, I think, a vehicle for taking us inside the imaginations of the boys. So all of my work does have something of the kind of combination of an imaginary or a kind of slightly elevated world versus something which looks more like a sort of a mundane reality or the everyday, and a mixture of those two things. And so, I would say that at the moment that's a common thread in my work, that I combine those two things. And obviously I think it was my background is in theatre, and it felt like not only theatre but devised theatre was really important. The fact that these boys were writing it themselves, you know, that they were empowered to build something new that would somehow reflect the way they saw the world and what their references were and what their vocabulary was. And so a story like King Arthur, though it sort of has lots of common themes that are probably sort of perennially relevant, it also leaves a lot of space for reinterpretation, which is why it survived so long, I think. And So it was a kind of a template for those boys to just pour in their own ideas and their own thoughts and perspectives on the world, which is why it sort of ends up reflecting their lives. But I think that's why the theatre is part of it, because it takes us inside their heads in a way that you probably wouldn't be able to fully do otherwise.
Yeah, and also allows you to kind of harness the power of the story in a very specific way, and remind the audience that, you know, the power of storytelling and how it can be repurposed and, let's say, reused and things like that over centuries in the case of King Arthur.
Exactly. Exactly. And actually that story was and the stories of that kind, those sort of like mythologies and repeat the kind of masculine hero trope, and that kind of mythology is kind of plugged back into time and time again, sometimes by the far right and all the rhetoric around sort of protecting sovereign land, you know, defending your borders, owning your kingdom, you know, and so we saw some of that rhetoric in the Wales Leave campaign, and it felt like, it's obviously like so many stories that seemingly underpin our culture, it does get repurposed according to the agendas of the person doing it. So I suppose it felt important to I suppose, as an act of kind of self-determination, to let those boys do the same thing, actually let those boys tell their own story, and let those boys have access to an ancient story that underpins our culture, and actually have the sort of empower them to show us their version, you know, that there isn't really one precious version of the story, you know, that actually every generation kind of needs to work out for themselves how those themes and how those lessons or those cautions or those ideas are relevant to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Has it sparked or maybe reignited an interest in filmmaking that addresses society as it is now? You know, would you say that's a theme of your work, or is this a project that's kind of enabled that?
Well, I think, you know, obviously that's what I would hope that the Uncertain Kingdom anthologies do have that effect, obviously, that people want to see more and give more space to spontaneously kind of created work that is reflective of the way someone sees something, you know, and maybe work that is more personal and work that is maybe more surprising. And so that's what I would hope, that it's a kind of the way that it's been cleverly, those stories and perspectives have been cleverly packaged, I hope will give people confidence that they can trust the quality of the format, that, you know, and actually end up exploring work they wouldn't otherwise be drawn to.
Yeah.
And maybe surprising themselves about the sort of things that they enjoy and the kind of people they can relate to, actually. And you know, I think that that's probably one of the ambitions of the anthology, is that we connect on those themes, even if we disagree, that we sort of at least start having the same conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think you made a really beautiful and playful film, which I think definitely kind of connects emotionally. It's a really, really great piece of work. So thank you very much for talking to me today.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks, I appreciate that. Thanks for your time.
No worries.
Acre Fall Between is about a day in the future. We're constantly such flux and being bombarded with what is to come in terms of our environment, the land that we live on. It's his fears or anticipation of what his future might hold.
Antonia Campbell-Hughes, director of the experimental narrative Acre Fall Between.
I've seen clips does seem that maybe mine is a bit different. Well, anyway, we can, it's just tonally mine seems slightly different because I just went a slightly different, more narrative avenue.
Yeah, and I would like to talk about the kind of the form of the film and the genre and stuff in a bit.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll just start with what made you want to contribute to The Uncertain Kingdom in the first place.
So I think I was in Yucca Valley, which is near Joshua Tree, and last April, and I received a phone call, an email first, telling me about this scheme, program, project, and it was very timely, and asking me, if I would be willing to represent Northern Ireland, which immediately interests me because I've got this very kind of fierce, I wouldn't say it's nationalism, but just real love for where I come from, and that's because I was born in Derry, and we left when I was 3, and but then visited, my mother's Northern Irish, and visited very regularly, but there is that kind of, expat wandering sensibility that a lot of people who grew up in a sort of transatlantic expat environment, they really crave homes. They have almost a more impassioned approach to where they come from. And I have a real, an outside perspective on it. And so I really, really have a fierce love for this land. And so when they asked me to represent, and I've been working in Northern Ireland quite a lot, and I always felt sort of underrepresented as a Northern Irish national, I guess. I want the people to really understand that that's where I'm from. And so the opportunity to represent it as the singular filmmaker amongst a group who make up the United Kingdom was very important to me.
Great. And so this was a project that you had in mind previously, or was it something that you came up with when you were asked to contribute to the Uncertain Kingdom?
So no, I've always been writing and directing, obviously, and there was a few things that I've been writing that sort of were in the same tone, or there's sort of ideologies and theologies I was very interested in. And when I got this call, it was right after Easter, and I was in Derry on the Easter Sunday, I think, when Lyra McKee was shot, and I was there, and the streets were very unusual. Like suddenly there was, armored police vehicles around, and it was very reminiscent of a time. And it was very topical in my mind, without being political in any way. Just, it was like a day from 20 years ago, and I was very acutely conscious of what is to come. And so that being the theme behind Uncertain Kingdom, which was projections on 2020, it was very exciting to me. And so, but I really didn't want to make any sort of political statement or judgment, because that's all people ever associate Northern Ireland with. So I really wanted to make it about, very predominantly about the environment, the landscape, which is so unique to County Antrim. And that's something that's always been very important to me, that I think it's so important for the rest of the world to appreciate Northern Ireland for other things other than its political history and Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Was that a reason as well for kind of leaning into the sci-fi element? Because I found your film so cinematic, and as well as being something which really kind of captures the landscape, it kind of leans into kind of classic ecological and kind of, conceptual sci-fi. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the genre and then kind of any influences you were drawing from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so a lot of people, when I was developing it, it was sort of, like a synopsis of something I've been working on for a long time. And I just think as a genre, sci-fi is much more interesting when it's nuanced and personal. I've always liked slightly more low-budget sci-fi, where it's more human. And, I think most of the kind of lo-fi human films that there are have a sort of sci-fi element, because our personal hopes and dreams and our fantasies and our fears are the foundation of what is sci-fi. So this particularly I had to explain it a lot because it was slightly atmospheric and abstract. Is that it's about a man who is so, as the world that we're in currently and in the past number of years, is where we've been so completely bombarded by what is to become of us, climate change and all kinds of, fires and just quite pandemics, huge things, that we're in a sort of constant state of fear and loss. And, it's like it is like a kind of, a fantasy sort of environment world that we're living in. So this is about one man's projection onto what he thinks could potentially become of him.
Yeah.
That's the sort of sci-fi element. Yeah.
And I just wondered if I watch a lot of short films, and often you can sort of tell short films that are trying to be features, and this doesn't feel like it's trying to be a feature. It's a beautifully contained short, but it also contains within it the seed of something larger. I wonder if it is something that you would consider going back to and kind of telling on a bigger scale, because I think it's so ready for that kind of treatment.
Yeah, without sounding all business and callous, it is the very it's more like sorry, you can edit out my ums and ahs. It's like a tonal piece for something that are. It's a TV show I've been working on, but I do get very fixated on certain themes across all the work I'm doing.
Yeah.
You can see the thread in certain years when I've been working on various things. You can see the thread of things I've been interested in, and I think there's a very interesting human connection with the land that we come from. Specifically this, in order to make it relevant to Northern Ireland and fully embracing the fact that I'm per se an outsider, so I have no right to make any grand statements. What I've always found very interesting about any places or countries that have been colonized and people who feel intrinsically part of the land, where it's very precious to them, when they're colonized or there's a change in a political structure, it's like being displaced without any physical relocation. So suddenly their whole identity changes. And that's something that is very current and constant in our world, but it goes back to multiple generations.
Yeah.
But that's what I think is very interesting also in science fiction, is we're sort of looking broader, and we're looking at ourselves being hosted by our planet rather than us being a dominant force. And there's a huge arrogance and greed that is intrinsic to the human race. And these are all sort of things that have always been evident in sci-fi through decades, but now it's more tangible.
Yeah. Do you think that more filmmakers should be kind of making work that's thematically kind of resonant and either in form or the content? What I liked about your film was that you feel what it's about without being kind of directly kind of
lectured
told. Yeah. So but do you think it's do you think we're in an age where there should be more people kind of tuning into the kind of the planet and just general kind of societal stuff that it should be talked about?
Yeah, the thing is, there's so much representation and awareness in our world of independent film specifically, and television at the moment. There's so much talk about diversity, and people have less opportunity, like socially sort of marginalized. I hate that word, but and there's been great moves towards that. Even women in film is the most basic. Trying to 50-50 parity spend from government bodies, Clean Ireland, BFI, etc. And I think that has been a great change, and so much independent film is very much focused on our social structures and all these themes. But as well, I'm quite interested in making films that are also entertainment without. So there is a kind of more heightened element to it, like is in my short, so that it's a feeling rather than it comes from your gut and your body rather than from your head.
Yeah. Well, I think you've definitely captured that in the short. I think it's a really gripping piece of work. The Uncertain Kingdom feels like a good model for short films, because it's kind of rare that you see short films produced and collated and then kind of distributed like this. I wondered if if you thought it's been a kind of positive experience in terms of promoting the short film and kind of showing people how you could potentially do something on a bigger scale with shorts.
Yeah. I thought, to be honest, I think that the team behind Uncertain Kingdom are quite ingenious, because when they first pitched it to me or told me what they were going to be doing, I thought, why not? It's great. They're approaching really good filmmakers, and there's quite a lovely mix. And so, what's to lose? But what they've actually managed to do in terms of it having a common theme, it being so current, that's also really good, because it really engages the imagination of a very wide audience. I think that's why there's so much what people are so open to receive it, in terms of cinemas and online audiences and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I was wondering about this, because I remember I used to watch like the Film 4 shorts. You could get them. They would have DVD releases. They'd send them out, and they were compiled. So that was more like a funding scheme, and they'd have them all compiled that way. So there's often shorts will be showed. I'm not sure if they're cinema release, but they would be released annually in terms of who they financed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I don't know how wide an audience that reaches.
Indeed. Yeah.
But this is just, it just seems a very clever, economical way to use a low budget that would normally go to, a low budget film that would not necessarily get any kind of traction, and to give multiple people a voice and a platform.
Yeah. Well, I'm really pleased that you accepted the invitation, because I think it's a really wonderful film. And thank you very much for talking to me this morning.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Okay, take care. Bye.
So thanks again to everyone who gave up their time to talk to me about their films for this episode. And yeah, Dario, what did you make of all of that, and where do you want to kick off?
So I think really just kind of starting with John at the beginning, and the concept behind the project. I mean, it's interesting. He talked about concept, and I think he's right in sort of talking about that idea of shorts as being concept driven. And again, we talked about this a little bit beforehand, the idea of what is a short film for a student, and sometimes that cramming in of narrative and journey, it isn't really sort of aligned to what a short film can do. And I think that short films do live and die by their concept, and I think he's right in that. And the other thing I think that's key, to this selection is the idea of having something to say without being didactic. I know you talked a lot about that, and it's quite a difficult balance to strike, I think, because at the end of the day, it's a film, so are people going to watch it? And I mean, I'm somebody who can let didacticism pass a little bit. I'm fine with that. But do you know what I mean? I think if you're just coming to something, being sort of shouted at, this is what you should think, is obviously, if you look at, I think a lot of different contexts politically, people, I think it's clear that one of the things that people don't react well to is being shouted at that they're wrong. But yeah, just reiterating that idea of that the talent is out there, but the visibility seems to be a problem, and how can shorts break out? And he said something that I think a lot of people kind of intuitively know, that Britain doesn't really have a sort of self-reflexive cinema culture in the same way that, say, France does, or the United States, where I think that Britain is much more TV orientated culturally. And, I think it's a historical thing. I think it's because of the way that the film industry is set up in the UK. And I think that we are, we see it as an industry where our talents are sort of an attachment to Hollywood, and the way that it's set up like that, I don't think it's seen as a kind of a cultural measure of what Britishness is. So it's nice to see that this group of films is actually trying to sort of deal with that, and the way that John set up the projects as a whole to try and engage with those questions. And obviously with 1,147 entries, which is a lot, then people took up that idea. There is a thirst for that sense of British cinema, and what can that add to a conversation?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that, having sort of done Film Stock last year, and then obviously for sort of 10 years back in the early 2000s, it was always clear that independently there has always been a thirst to use short films and kind of do just that, create a kind of cinematic culture around the form. But again, it's always been the outlets for that work, and how so many of the festivals lean towards the narrative industry, and particularly Hollywood, and a lot of, because it's quite a small country, a lot of the oxygen of shorts is taken up by a few festivals, Encounters, Aesthetica, London Short Film Festival, which are all really good and have their merits, but kind of take up a lot of the minimal cultural space for talking about shorts. And I think, like you say, because the industry is so entwined with kind of serving Hollywood and kind of international production, and TV, which has always been the traditional training ground for features historically, rather than shorts. Shorts have struggled to get a foothold, and what's great that what John and his other producers did was kind of see a gap for a project that was driven by a desire to kind of explore something. And all the shorts that they've been able to make, arguably kind of get to the heart of what that project is trying to do, in terms of, like you said before, about being inclusive and diverse in the positive sense of the word, rather than putting it into one film, which could never have done that, or even an event which called for films that had already been made. There's something really interesting about the fact that there's 3 producers who've overseen this whole project and have kind of marshalled those films into being. And what was really positive to hear from all of them was how the filmmakers were trusted to do that. I think it's a kind of testament to John and the others that they kind of had a hands-off approach to the production once things were going, sort of trusting the process, and that the body of work would stand for itself, which is really exciting.
So maybe we can talk about Swan and Sucker Punch first, because obviously you've done the interviews, but unfortunately with the file issue. But interesting. Like Swan, I thought really called to that wing of British filmmaking, or even TV, that relates to British surrealism and eccentricity.
Yeah,
I thought. It's really funny to sort of see Mark Addy in there, who kind of does Mark Addy in everything he's in, you know what I mean? But he plays that role really well. And I thought it was going to, it starts as one thing and ends up into something else. And I thought there was a real sort of, obviously there was a sort of Lanthimos tip in there. I don't know whether that was a reference specifically, but kind of funny. And I really liked the wife's reactions, and it was just that sense of British domesticity is more about what's not said, and the gestures and the eye rolls between partners. I thought that was really funny. And yeah, the Iggy London one, Sucker Punch, very, very much playing the audience off against its own sense of what it already knows about the problems with media, kind of Black Swan-esque. And even at the very end was like a second. A sort of second move, as it were, towards it's quite bleak, really, because it was like there's nothing that's not an angle, that's not already commercialized. Everything's commercialized. There's no outside of that. So yeah, pretty really nice couple of shorts there, I thought.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about Swan, because I had a similar kind of response to that kind of like 1960s Richard Lester kind of Python era, almost like you could imagine a Python sketch. Along the same lines, but that relationship between the husband and wife kind of reminded me, it's similar in a similar way to what Sucker Punch does, which is kind of the interior complexities of these things. So Brexit, for example, is obviously the big metaphor in Swan, but within the marriage, and how that's kind of changed over time, and how even within those two people who are seemingly compatible, but in a kind of generic sense, how behavior can shift, and suddenly what someone thought was one thing, it becomes something else. And it's really the performances are really superb. And I think that the bleakness of Sucker Punch kind of took me by surprise, but very much, like you say, in line with the kind of the Black Mirror kind of hopelessness of this is just the way things are now, And then even kind of watching it now and seeing the kind of the media coverage of what's going on, and still the fake news and the kind of the lack of clarity and misinformation, and how people are responding to it online is just like, yeah, we are kind of deeply in this thing. But again, it was such a short, it managed to pack so much in a few minutes, because again, the concept for both of those was really, really strong. So yeah, apologies again to Iggy and Sophie that their chats didn't come out, but it was great to talk to them about their work, and well worth checking out their movies.
Yeah, and I think that with the rest of the films, there were two that really, really stood out for me. I think Stromer's, again, maybe bias creeping in there, but Sauna I thought was just, it almost reminded me of the style of documentary that we're seeing a little bit more of now, which is much more owing a debt, I think, to observational documentary from back in the 60s, where it's just kind of like trying to be removed from the action and just let it take place. I mean, Maidan is another example, I think, that's the sort of, extreme example of this. And it's an insight I don't think you would ordinarily get, but, it really interesting in terms of the sauna as a space, and people in their kind of swimming costume having conversations in the sauna. It's a really odd kind of environment, I think, just generally as a place where you're kind of stripped bare, for want of a better word, to your, physically, but then, people do sort of strike up conversations, weirdly enough, in saunas for some reason. And what I thought was great about that was, I think that the participants were just unself-conscious, and that sort of interrogation with not just what they were saying, but the idea of sort of bodies interacting. And the stories didn't have a predetermined context, which again is, I think, a thing that we're seeing more and more now with documentary, where it's leaving the viewer to have to do some work to orient themselves to what is going on. It's great to sort of listen to Stromer, somebody who is, when you sort of have students go through the process, they're students, but then somebody comes out on the other end, and you can tell there's a sort of maturity of understanding around process and what she's actually trying to show, which is really sort of gratifying.
Yeah, it's definitely gratifying as a teacher, but not taking credit for it, but kind of seeing that kind of progress. And it is a really confident film, and it's kind of it's complex, like you say, in terms of what the context of what you're seeing, which looks so simple, but it's kind of it's full of intricacies, that a reminder of the role that space and place play in community, in kind of breaking down the signifiers that have become so common in terms of what we're looking for, in order to pre-agree with people, and like you say, when there's just two people in their underwear in a sauna, there's none of those signifiers, and it captures really well these kind of spaces that are so integral to communities understanding each other and having a space for communication and discourse and conversation, that's real in real time and in a kind of real space, rather than online, where there's so many different kind of barriers and signifiers. And her instincts as a filmmaker, I think, are really, really strong, and it really comes across in that short, where she kind of knows where to put the camera and how to get people to talk and share and be comfortable, which I think as a documentary filmmaker is kind of hard to do, and I think she does it really well. And what was the other one? Yeah,
the other one I really liked was Antonia Campbell Hughes's Acre for Between, which I just thought was great. It had something of a 28 Days Later feel, but with a bit of Tarkovsky thrown in, and also it definitely had, of all the films, I think it had a real cinematic aesthetic, which I think some of them could have been sort of TV spots, I think, as much as anything else. And everything about it was great sound, very immersive. The idea, the concept as well made you work. It was subtle. I had to watch it twice to sort of get my head around whether I'd understand what was going on. And I think Antonia sort of talks about the tone of the piece, and I think that's really, really important. And the representation, or the way that you're immersed into the landscape, and the sort of allusions that you can make towards environmentalism, and it's almost kind of like an existential crisis of a guy waking up I mean, it's quite a well-worn idea, you know, that you wake up and you're the last person on Earth. You know, there's loads of films that have been made with that sort of concept, but the way it plays with the abstract nature and the metaphor, and I think Antonia talks really well about those ideas and trying to sort of work with those themes, but only portray them through the aesthetic and not really tell you anything about it. And then you're kind of like, oh wow. I mean, and I think you were right in saying, you know, this is sort of ripe for an expansion. I think it was so good.
Yeah, I love that short as well, and I think a reminder of the potential of cinema, but certainly kind of short cinema in terms of like being elemental and stripping it down to a concept, and a really strong kind of grasp of the form and the filmmaking, which you just feel in this film, that there's a feeling to it and a tone and an atmosphere which is just really kind of profound and kind of enveloping, which is kind of rare. It's still rare to see films which feel so assured and accomplished in their kind of cinematic art, where a filmmaker they've all had the same limitations, and they've all chosen to kind of do different things with them, and this is one where it's really honed in on a kind of cinematic experience, and that was really, really exciting. And yeah, it was really great to talk to her. That's a filmmaker that I'm really interested in seeing where she goes, and been following her career since she was the lead in Kieran Evans' Kelly and Victor, and just a really, really exciting film, and kind of really great to talk to her.
Yeah, awesome. And the other one I kind of really liked out of this batch was Left Coast, and again a sort of a similar thing I think to Sauna in terms of this sort of there's something to be written on this kind of wave of really, really observational, documentaries where the director is trying not to intervene. There seems to be something around that right now where almost sort of an antithesis to the Michael Moore, I'm going to put myself in the middle of the situation. No, it's kind of like the situation is there. And I think maybe it's a recognition of the fact that filmmakers are recognizing that just simply as a filmmaker, you have a level of privilege that is automatically uneven, you know what I mean, or disassociated from the subject that you're actually recording, and there seems to be an acknowledgement of that in the actual aesthetic, which is really, really interesting. And I think it sort of reminded me, it's set in Blackpool, and it reminded me of my kind of grandparents' generation. And the use of the radio as a soundtrack I thought was really interesting. That reminded me a little bit of Bait, to be honest. But yeah, the sort of focus on the food bank. Interesting I thought about that was and again, that the change in Britishness and that notion of British community, whereas British community would have been structured around the pub or the working men's club or, even the football team. But now the place where community kind of collectivizes is the food bank. And that tells you a lot about where Britain is right now.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's fascinating to think about. And again, it kind of just through, like you say, kind of taking that as the story and kind of brings other things to light, including the regional versus the national conversation, and what's going on in that community on a local political level is not bound to kind of party politics, and in the same way that the idea of it is, if it's food banks, it's people on the left. And the film doesn't feel like it's traditionally just, liberal people, it's about that community dealing with the problems in that community. And it's a really lovely film. I think she's a great filmmaker. I don't know if you've seen Almost Heaven, the feature she made about the Chinese funeral parlor and the young girl. It's just a really great, she's a really great filmmaker, and like Stromer and that film, they do feel like a return to a more kind of distanced, observational approach rather than, like you say, a kind of explicit, politically driven kind of subjective intervention in the film, which is great. It was really nice. I think what's interesting as well is Alison Hargreaves' Camelot kind of is kind of one foot in that camp and one foot out of that camp, that kind of takes a lot of the different kind of things that have emerged in kind of documentary filmmaking around reconstruction and dramatization and kind of playing around with form to kind of heighten the experience of the locals. It's kind of, because it's kind of rooted in ideas of mythology and kind of histories of place, it's less politically charged in a kind of immediate sense than something like the food bank is. But it does contain elements of that, of kind of trying to retain a distance in terms of representing a place as fairly as you can when you are an intervening filmmaker, as possible as that can ever be. I think the way you just described it in terms of Left Coast is really well put in terms of what's inherent in kind of that activity. But also, and again, one of the achievements of Camelot is knowing the restrictions of the project, is kind of working with young people in a community and being able to draw out something which doesn't feel tokenistic and doesn't feel exploitative and doesn't feel like a gimmick, in terms of working with sort of young children and recreating kind of myths and legends, and also kind of trying to embed that in the real history of the place, I think is again kind of hard to do. And that was exciting as well about this project. Like you say, you start to see filmmakers at different periods of their career established and establishing, really kind of working in kind of exciting and interesting ways that just kind of bodes well for the form, and also gets you excited about what they're next going to do, be that kind of more shorts or kind of feature films.
Yeah, but the last one I saw was Pavement, which I liked the concept a lot, and I thought the execution of the sort of use of special effects of this homeless person kind of sinking in the pavement was a really effective visual, and I think it really captured that idea of the feeling that we all have when we walk past homeless people in the street. There's a sort of feeling of ambivalence that we have to admit to. On the one hand, you feel empathetic, you feel sympathy, you want to help, but it's like, what you tell yourself, oh, what can I actually do? You know what I mean? And then if you've got some change, maybe you give some change. If you don't, you're like, oh, I haven't got any change. And there's sort of all conflicted feelings in that. Maybe if my one criticism, and it's not even a criticism, it's just a sort of personal thing. It felt a little bit on the nose for me at the end with the use of Jerusalem, the music. I was just kind of, yeah, I get that. I got it before you added that music. But yeah, no, another interesting concept, I think, in terms of what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, no, that was the film that surprised me the most. When it started, I kind of, almost like the characters in the film, kind of like could feel myself going, oh, like here's another kind of story about homelessness. And then what was really surprising was how kind of laser focused it was on its concept and its kind of direct visual representation of that feeling that I was carrying when I started watching it, and that is inherent in so many people. And yeah, it does something really simply, really powerfully, and it would not work as a feature. I had the same thing about Jerusalem. I did feel like, I could really have done without that. But by that point, I was like, okay, yeah, it's worked on me. It made me stop and check and think and realize my kind of, which I think is what I like about shorts when they can do that is kind of flip your perspective in such a short amount of time, and just by kind of being really, really direct. And it is on the nose, but intentionally.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's something where it is a concept that it's showing something. And for what they managed to do in terms of the VFX with the budgets and the time, I think it was really impressive. And it was he says it as well. It was good enough to get that across. And yeah, that's why I wanted to talk to him, because it was a film that I was surprised by at the end compared to how I thought at the start in terms of what I thought of it. And yeah, there's no way that could be a feature. That could only ever be a short, which again was another kind of thing that made me think about this project as something which is really valuable as a space for ideas that need to be told in that way.
Great. So that's all the films discussed there. Neil, where can people see this work?
So the films go live on June the 1st and they're in a variety of different places. All 20 shorts from the 20 directors will be released on the 1st of June, and it'll be available on the BFI player, programmed in 2 feature-length volumes, and those volumes will also be available on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, Curzon Home Cinema, and the British Council are releasing the films internationally. So hopefully you get your film fix from one of those places, and we'll be able to kind of check them out. And if not, then get on it, because particularly kind of Curzon and BFI Player have a lot of good stuff. So that's where you'll be able to find them, and includes all the films, including Left Coast, which we also talked about, which is the Carol Salter film, and our friend of the podcast, Hope Dixon Leach, is one of the filmmakers as well. Made a really interesting kind of quasi-narrative documentary called Strong is Better Than Angry, which is a really interesting piece of work. So you can find them in all those places, and we'll put the links up on the show notes as well, so you can find out where they are.
Great. So just before we go then, a couple of extra things. I just wanted to say it was really, really sad to hear the news of Lynn Shelton passing away. I mean, there's obviously people passing in the film industry that we admire a lot, but you had actual direct dealings with her, and as both of us listened to Mark Maron's podcast, it was there was a sort of sense of I know the context of this person to some degree, and her films were of a piece, and it's one of those filmmakers again who should have been more widely known than she was. A real tragedy.
Yeah, genuinely heartbreaking, really. I woke up on Sunday morning and to a load of messages, and just kind of utter disbelief, and just really sad that she died, and a filmmaker that not only should be more widely known, but who was in the last couple of features really kind of stretching out and doing really interesting things. Her last 2 features, Outside In and Sword of Trust, are so different in terms of the tone and scope and sort of ambition tonally from her earlier work, that it was just really exciting. She was doing great work in TV, and then it's just so tragic. And I knew her a little bit. I interviewed her for the May Journal in February last year, and weirdly that interview came out a year tomorrow, because some people asked me for the link, and when I went back in to get it, it sort of came out pretty much a year to the day. And I spent a few hours talking to her for that, and it was just a really great conversation. She was just genuine and inspiring, and just really a really nice person who kind of, and I sort of mentioned this in the piece that I wrote, which is she was confident in her ability, and that she knew what she was doing, and she knew the trajectory she was on, and she fought to make the work that she believed in, and used all of the opportunities and resources that were available at any given time to make work that was interesting and dynamic, and kind of about something, about human connection and about relationships. I think she's a massively underrated filmmaker, and it was a real privilege to be able to talk to her, and rewarding in the sense that she felt seen, and that sounds kind of grandiose, but I don't think anyone had described her as an auteur or seen the connections in her work that explicitly, and that was nice, and that kind of just put us into a good kind of sort of friendly relationship in terms of sort of email. And then at Filmstock, when we were looking for a closing film, I reached out and asked her if we could have the UK premiere of Sword of Trust, and she was like, yes, definitely. And I sort of said, we're a tiny little festival in Luton, and I understand you've probably got an ambition for it. She was like, no, you want to screen it, I really want you to screen it. So she kind of helped facilitate the screening of it, and every kind of interaction I had with her was just nice and friendly and kind of inspiring, in the sense that this is an independent filmmaker in the truest sense of the term, and it's a huge loss, because she was great, and kind of just at that point where she was starting to really do the work that she kind of always promised in terms of scope and ambition, which I don't want to say that to diminish her early work, which is amazing. And also, it has to be noted, she made her first feature at 39 in 2006. And look at that body of work in 14 years. And it's kind of astonishing if you look at all of her TV work as well. You know, Mad Men, Master of None, Glow, The Good Place. Like, she was an astonishingly good and prolific filmmaker. And it's an absolute tragedy. And it's going to take a while, I think, for people to get over this one. And a note on the Mark Maron podcast, if you haven't heard it, it's hard to listen to, but just beautiful, you know, that someone just you just feel the love and the heartbreak in it, and a kind of just one of those moments where your heart goes out to him and what he's lost, and how he could kind of voice just that feeling of loss that so many people have now. Yeah,
there's echo all of that. But not to end on too sad a note, though, we've got a nice anniversary to congratulate the Raising Films team.
Yep, happy birthday to Raising Films. 5 years of fighting the good fight. Talk about fighting to claim a space and kind of do important work. They are an organisation that I've had several dealings with, and we obviously know Hope Dixon-Leach very well, who's one of the kind of the driving forces of the Raising Films project, which is an organisation which supports parents and carers in the film industry and fights for parents and carers to be recognised in terms of in terms of support for what they do and the ability to make and work in the film industry. It's a brilliant organisation and one well worth checking out and supporting. And 5 good years, and excited about what's to come. So well done.
Yep, congratulations to Hope and the team. That will just about do it for us. Thanks very much, Neil, for your work on this podcast. A lot of work went into this one. I hope that the filmmakers enjoy our discussion of their films.
Yeah, thanks, man. It was really fun. Real pleasure to spend some time talking about shorts. I really enjoyed you talking about them as well. Some really really nice insight and in that tape. So hopefully, they'll be pleased with what we've covered, and hope people check the films out, because there's a really really great bunch of films in there.
Great. And we have coming up, at least 2 or 3 more episodes coming up before we go on our summer break. We've also got the next newsletter coming out very soon. Who knows, we may even do another video for the Patreon subscribers, because that seemed to go down well, believe it or not. I don't know what you feel about that, Neil.
Yeah, well, if the fans are clamouring for it, who are we to deny, you know? So, I'm up for that. It was fun. And
it's all about satisfying the public.
Absolutely. We are nothing if not shills for our paying public. But no, looking forward to kind of, exploring more of the kind of different things we can do on the bonus for our Patreon subscribers. And thanks everyone who's signed up there. Another couple of interview episodes coming up, which is very exciting. And looking forward to sort of seeing people's response to this episode and those ones. Thank you as always, Dario, for your time here.
Thanks very much, and thank you to our listeners and to our Patreon subscribers. If you want to get any of our bonus content, it is for the premium price of just $2.50 a month. So if you want to help us just with our running costs, we would really appreciate it. So this again has been the Cinematologist Podcast. Thanks for listening. Staring with blood